and welcome to the Write Club podcast, where we take you behind the pages and into the fascinating world of writing. I'm Beth, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Mary. Hi, Mary, how are you?
Hi Beth, I'm great, thank you. Today we're joined by Simon Mason. Simon Mason is a British author of juvenile and adult fiction and of non-fiction. During a career in publishing, he worked for a number of different companies, including Oxford University Press, Thames and Hudson, Pushkin Press, and David Fickling Books, where he was managing director from 2012 to 2018. He has also taught at Oxford Brookes University, where he is a Fellow of Creative Writing. And from 2021 to 2023, he was a Royal Literary Fund Fellow at Exeter College, Oxford.
Wow, that's quite the CV there. Hi, Simon, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, it's very nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for doing all that research. That's quite a lot of research. I'm very impressed. You must be reading my mail.
That's not creepy at all. Oh, it's brilliant to have you on. Where is it that you're joining us from today?
I'm at home in Oxford.
Oh, brilliant. And are you in your regular writing spot?
I am. We live in a small terraced house, and I work in a back bedroom with a view of the brick wall of the extension which we built. Um, so I don't have so many distractions, and it's been a congenial room to work in, I must say.
So you're glad not to have too many distractions. Does that help with the writing?
Yeah, I think it does. I'm quite a distractible sort of person, to be honest. And if something's kicking off, then I tend to take an interest. So the only thing kicking off actually is me. So one of my writing habits is I do the voices. I think lots of authors do this. So I spend quite a bit of time shouting things out in different accents. And as I said, I live in a terrace house. In the house next door to me, in fact, in the room right next to the one in which I'm working now, there's someone else at work, and every so often he just coughs to let me know he's there and would I mind shutting up a bit.
Oh, Simon, we've really enjoyed your latest book, The Dangerous Stranger. For our listeners who haven't read it, could you give us a brief overview of the story, please?
Yes, well, I'm very glad you enjoyed it. Thank you. So it's the fifth book in a series of crime novels, all set in Oxford, featuring the same mismatched pair of detectives called Wilkins, no relation. And this new book, it's sort of a thought experiment. It's a what if book, and it's set in the aftermath of the Southport murders, when there were quite a lot of riots in British cities. And I think Oxford, like other cities, braced itself to expect trouble. And in the event there wasn't a riot, but my book is what if there had been a riot? So it begins with a riot outside a hotel housing asylum seekers, and the riot gets out of hand, and a young refugee is burned alive, which is horrific. It's also a very Oxford sort of thing. We have a tradition of burning people here in Oxford. We used to do it just to archbishops and Jewish people, but anyway, in my book, I imagine it being extended to asylum seekers. Um, and then because I like messy crimes, things that aren't really rational, they aren't part of an ingenious plan, things go wrong. It turns out quite quickly that the refugee isn't a refugee at all, but a French tourist. And then things really kick off.
And why did you want to write this story?
That's a really good question, which I probably can't answer. I think of my writing as coming from two different places, the conscious and the unconscious. And very often my stories begin with a daydream, which just seems like we all daydream. It just seems to occur to me. It floats into my imagination. And so I didn't begin this book with a theme to explore or issues I wanted to express. I began with the image of the riot, just that in my head, which is a really resonant sort of image, a dramatic, but also an intimidating and frightening image. So I began with that, and then I started to explore it.
Mm. It's also quite a topical subject as well at the minute with everything going on in the country
Yeah.
and in the world. Did that play a part in influencing how the story kind of went?
It did inevitably, I think, because as you say, these themes and these issues and these ideas and these opinions are all part of the context in which the drama takes place. I'm not someone who begins with a theme. I'm someone who begins with a story, but out of that story, particularly I think with crime fiction, these sorts of themes emerge, and my characters, start expressing themselves, and they have opinions about these sorts of issues. And I'm interested in that dynamic between characters who are involved necessarily in these issues rather than putting forward a view of my own.
Mm, yeah. And you've now written 5 books featuring Ryan and Ray Wilkins, which are a duo that I absolutely loved. But on paper they just really shouldn't work at all, but they
Yeah,
do. And I'm picturing you now, like you just said, that you speak their languages or you
yeah,
speak out their dialogue, and I can really picture that being a really interesting scenario because they speak so differently. Um,
yeah.
but what is it about the friction between these two? One which is a trailer park boy with a bit of a chip on his shoulder, and the other who's a privately educated, articulate detective. It makes them so effective. And how does that personal conflict mirror the opposing contrasts of Oxford itself, which is a city that you've described as caught between the powerful and the powerless?
Yeah, yeah. I think that was from the beginning very important to me, to be honest. The very origin of the first book was Ryan, who is my trailer park rat. The kid with the chip on his shoulder and anger management issues, and he shoots his mouth off, or he shouldn't be a policeman. He's constantly flirting with disciplinary procedures, but he's actually quite good at being a policeman. So I live near a what the Americans would call a trailer park, and I see these guys as I cycle past. And he just sort of swaggered into my imagination or slouched maybe into my imagination out of the trailer park. And I thought, if I saw him in the street, I'd make all the assumptions that people usually make. I'd think, oh, he's probably got a big dog on a chain back in his caravan, and he's probably got 3 or 4 kids by 3 or 4 different women, never sees any of them, in and out of jail, never done a day's work. And I turned all those assumptions on their head and thought, no, I'm gonna have him a law enforcement, not a lawbreaker, and I'm gonna have him a devoted father because his brutal upbringing, his father is a violent alcoholic, would have really, I think, bolstered his sense of justice and injustice, and would have made him want to be the sort of person that solved crimes. Um, but once I had him, I immediately and instinctively thought of Ray as the polar opposite. And so Ray came into my imagination precisely because he wasn't going to get on with Ryan. And I mean, looking back, that's a very traditional literary thing to do, isn't it? You can think of odd couples throughout literature, whether it's, I don't know, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, or Jeeves and Wooster, or these people, they create the story because of the friction between them. So I was thinking, as I say, I never think of themes and issues to begin with. I think of the drama of storytelling, and I thought two mismatched characters, they shouldn't get on. They don't get on, and that would be quite funny. But then, I mean, you made the point about Oxford, and again, I wasn't thinking immediately of this, but I was just sort of instinctively feeling it, that Oxford is a place of similar dramatic contrasts, between the powerful and the powerless, the privileged and the voiceless, and in other ways as well, actually. I mean, all cities to a degree, but Oxford particularly, um, between young and old. It's deeply historical, Oxford. You can just think of those very ancient buildings. At the same time, it's just absolutely packed with young people. All those students, all the language students that come in. Um, and the contrast between Englishness and foreignness. It's very English in a visual sense, all those buildings and so on. But again, it's packed with foreigners at the university, students or tutors, tourists flood into the city. You hear 100 different languages being spoken as you go around the city. So it's a very dramatically contrasty sort of place. And again, I thought that would be good for storytelling.
Yeah, I think it came across brilliantly. And even the details of, I really loved Ryan's relationship with his son. So beautiful. But then also Ray, you would picture him as kind of the perfect dad, perfect husband, but he's got a lot of issues going on at home. So I really liked the fact that even though like their actual upbringing and their culture and their way of kind of just living their life was so different, their actual home life was really different as well. So yeah, I thought you did that brilliantly, and it really helped keep the story going and kept me really intrigued to see what was kind of going to happen throughout the book. But yeah, would you be able to tell us a little bit about messy play and composition?
Yeah. So messy play and composition are what I call two phases of writing. I think of my writing as falling into two phases. Again, it's a very, I think, traditional distinction between these two different sorts of activity. The messy play is the making it up phase, and composition is the writing it down phase. And messy play is about inventiveness, and composition is about language. Um, Anyone who's had children knows about messy play. You take your kid along, and they press their little fists into pots of paint and glue and sand, and then they slap them all over bits of paper and the floor and their faces, and it's about a sort of anarchic creativity with no worry about the finished product in a sense. And so I call my first phase messy play because I do just mess about with ideas for story, and I spend a lot of that time just daydreaming, really, and allowing myself to daydream. Anything, characters, story arc, scenarios, conversations, descriptions of a change in the weather or some. I'm trying to think of all these things, and then out of that mess, uh, usually something story-like starts to emerge. Things connect together. I apply a bit of analysis, and I start to develop explanations for the daydreams that I've had. And on a practical level, I have an A4 notebook, and during that process, I handwrite notes. I just jot down whatever comes into my mind. I'll very often begin a handwritten note with the words, "This has just occurred to me," or "I don't know what I'm going to do about this," or I'm really thinking aloud in the handwritten notes. And I'll fill a notebook, so about 50,000 words, quite a lot. And out of that usually comes an outline. It's not really the aim, it's more like a byproduct. But once I've got that outline, then I turn to the laptop and I start composing. And then that phase is much more about trying to use language in a way that might bring to life the things I was imagining in the messy play phase. And it's not like the messy play is all about creating the blueprint and then the composition is like building the building, because during composition I've still got to be very flexible and allow myself to think, yeah, that I thought that might work and it doesn't actually work, so I need to do something different. Or sometimes, oh, I can think of a better way of doing what I thought of doing in the first place. So those are my two phases, and messy play takes between 2 and 4 months, and composition takes between 6 and 8 months.
I think
Ah,
that's really good advice. It's really an interesting way of breaking it down, a way that we haven't heard before, have we, Beth? But I
no.
think I could definitely, I can picture doing that, and it feels very free and creative as well, which is nice, not just tied to the laptop.
Yeah, no, I mean that's exactly right, and it suits me, right? So it wouldn't suit anyone else, and I'm not saying to any other writer, this is the way to do it, but it suits me, and that's because the emphasis is on playfulness and flexibility, and And I struggle a little bit with sometimes being a bit nervous, a bit inhibited, fearful of the blank screen, not wanting to start because I think it might be rubbish. It will be rubbish. It'll be complete rubbish, but I can scrub it out and start again, and that's in the spirit of playfulness.
And on that topic, could you tell us the best piece of advice you've ever received that you felt helped your writing?
Yeah, I've skipped ahead a bit in my answers because I would have said playfulness. I can't remember who said that, and maybe no one did. Maybe I just developed it myself. But there is another piece of specific advice I was given once, which has always stuck in my mind. And again, this applies to me and not necessarily anyone else. But I'd written I drafted a middle grade novel because I wrote children's books before crime. A middle grade novel called Moon Pie, which featured an 11-year-old girl called Martha looking after her alcoholic father after her mother had died, and also her younger brother. Quite a lot of children end up of carers of their parents because they're ill or they have a disability or maybe an addiction, like in my story. And I had a conversation with my editor, and she said, "Okay, I like all this, very good, da di da, Simon, well done, but I think you don't go into the character enough, into her thoughts, into her emotions, her feelings." And I said something like, "Well, um, I think I want the reader to complete that process by imagining what she's thinking and feeling by what I'm describing her doing." And my editor said, "That's not really enough. I think if you give the reader more of a hint of her internal life, it will change the book completely." And I thought, well, I'll give it a go, right? So I started rewriting the book just very simply at the appropriate points, taking the reader into what Martha was feeling as she said or she did these things. And it was like watching myself colour in a pencil drawing. The whole thing got warmer and more intimate. And it gave everything that Martha did or said more impact, more emotional impact. In other words, it made it made a much stronger emotional connection between the book and the reader, between the characters and the reader. Um, I'm very fond of quoting something Raymond Chandler, the great crime writer, said in a letter to a friend. He said when he was a young man, Raymond Chandler wrote crime for pulp fiction magazines, and he said the editor was always sending them back and would have crossed out half the story he'd written. Anything that smacked of style, he would cross out. Chandler said he'd written a phrase like, I passed out of hot sunshine and shadow fell on me like the cool touch of water. And this editor crossed it all out and wrote in the margin, our readers don't want this shit. It just holds up the action, right? And Chandler said in his letter, I think he's mistaken. I think readers only think they want action. What they actually want is the creation of emotion. And I think that's absolutely key in stories. And if you don't have the emotion, the action is just flat. And if you introduce the emotional connection, it's 500% more impactful.
I love that. It's really, really lovely. And obviously that was some advice from, was it your editor that gave you that
Yes.
advice?
Yeah.
And do you think that in your various publishing roles, working with other writers has helped your writing?
Yeah, I do actually. If you think of the editorial conversation between an editor on the one hand and the author on the other, I've been on both sides of the table in that conversation. And I think that's helped me. It helped me as an editor as well as helping me as an author. Um, that conversation can be it's really important, very valuable, but it can be very tricky because I think writing a book is an emotional experience. And if you've written a book, to discuss it with anyone else is also an emotional experience. And an editor can't sit there and say to the author, well, the ending's all wrong, isn't it? It's really bad. It's just rubbish. And or it can't say, Yeah, the ending won't do, but I've thought of a much better ending, and I'll give you that, and you can do that then. You have to create a much stronger and more intimate bond with the author from the editor's point of view. And that has to create a zone of trust so that the author knows the editor thinks they're a good writer. And once you've done that, then the editor can get on with the job, which they absolutely have to do, of giving the writer direct, honest criticism without the writer feeling, oh, I'm rubbish, I'm terrible, it's all wrong, I can't get going, right? So being an author and being aware of the sensitivity that I have discussing my own work, that really helped me, I think, in understanding that process. And from the author's point of view, when I was a young author, I didn't want the editor to say anything. I wanted them to give me 10 out of 10. We're not going to change a comma, Mr. Mason. Let it go straight to press. But as I got older, I realized that that conversation was such a valuable opportunity to get feedback, usually from an editor who really knows their stuff, has spent a long time reading the book, and is giving you valuable information. And I want that. So I welcomed it more and more as I got older as an author. And in fact, what I do now is I write a list of questions that I can take into that conversation along the lines of, I don't think it's funny enough. What do you think? I don't think the opening works. Do you agree? I think the ending's a bit flat. Is that right? I want to flush out any criticism that they have, because also it's the author's responsibility and prerogative to decide what to do with that criticism. The author can say, thanks very much, I don't agree, I'm going to leave it as it is. Or, yes, that's a good point. I don't agree with why you don't like it. I think there's another reason why it's not working, and I'm going to put in place a solution to that problem. The author needs to develop confidence that the feedback they're getting is going to help them, and they're in a position to decide what to do.
Yeah. It's a gift, isn't it, really, to get feedback?
Absolutely, it's such a valuable opportunity, and the people giving the feedback are usually people who really know what they're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And am I right in saying that your early obsession was the poetry of Dylan Thomas?
Dylan Thomas, I haven't read him for hundreds of years, but yeah, it was a pivotal moment for me. Um, I've heard the phrase before, I've been bitten by the poetry bug. And I was just suddenly infected with poetry. And it was Dylan Thomas. And I remember going into the sixth form, and the teacher, I went to a new school, and the teacher went round the class and said, what are you reading now? And people were reading a bit of classics, a bit of cozy crime. And I said Dylan Thomas. I was really frightened to say it because it sounded a bit weird. And the teacher said, ah, that's really interesting, because one of the wonderful things about Dylan Thomas's poetry is no one knows what the hell it means. So you can have your own meanings in your head. You can just sort of wander around the poems mentally, that wonderful language. And I felt so much better him saying that. And he was right. It was the language, really, and the images that were evoked by his phrase making. And it was that moment. There were two key moments in my life when I look back and I think, yeah, that's a moment when I thought, oh, I want to write. That was one of them. And it was a language related moment. It was, I want to see if I can do things with words.
Mm. And do you think that, or how did that kind of influence of the poetry from Dylan, how does that affect the rhythm of your dialogue today, or does it?
Yeah, well, I'm very interested in how you put words together, which dates from me reading Thomas's poetry. And then, when it comes to writing, say, a novel, I'm trying to achieve different effects in different situations. With dialogue, I always thought I had a pretty good ear. I was really quite vain about what a good ear I have. Other writers I thought had, oh, a bit of a tin ear, but No, I was pretty good. I had a conversation with Philip Pullman and he said, of course, everyone thinks they can write dialogue. Dialogue's easy. He said, description is hard. And I thought, oh yeah, I'm not so good at description. He's right. When I'm describing something, I'm conscious that I have to use language in a different way. When I'm writing dialogue, it's different again. And when I'm writing this character's dialogue, it's different from writing this other character's dialogue. I'm trying all the time to create effects, to create an impact, impacts of different sorts. And I spend a long time shunting words to and fro, putting a word in, taking it out over and over. I could do that forever, really, to be honest. It's a bit sad. Um, Auden, I think, said, you never finish a poem, you just abandon it. And I feel that about any writing I do. I could go on because I'm never going to get there to where I want it to be. But I enjoy the process of trying to get the right words and get the words in the right order in order to create the impact, whether it's a joke or whether it's a bit of dialogue or whether it's a bit of description or suspense or concealment or whatever.
Yeah, and when you find maybe like a boring patch, if there is such a thing, in a draft, um, what's your go-to trick for injecting energy back into the scene?
That's a really good question, because it happens a lot. Um, so this process I mentioned, of shunting words around, it's a process of rewriting, obviously, and that involves rereading. So I'm reading what I've done over and over. I'm trying to be a reader. I can't ever be a reader because I've written the stuff. I'm not neutral here, but I'm trying to do that. And that involves I try to go into a sort of reading trance where I'm not thinking, is this right? Is this wrong? Is this good? Is this bad? I'm just trying to register what I feel as a reader, as I would as a reader of something I hadn't read before. And then the first thing when I come to a boring bit is simply to notice this is a boring bit. I'm not so engaged here. And I don't immediately jump all over it because that's my instinct. Oh, I've got to put it right. I don't. I just note where it is and then I allow myself to relax. And I say to myself things like, I'll think about that. Maybe there's something I can do about it, but I won't rush into it, right? So the first thing I do is relax. If it's a very stubborn problem, then I do have I have two things I do which help me, right? One is I run. And when I go for a run, I find I think in a completely different way. I'm not trying to think. I might, when I run, just allow myself to think of a bit of the book, but then what happens then is things come into my mind and I start imagining things in a slightly different way. And because I'm thinking and running, it's different from thinking when I'm sitting. And very often solutions come into my mind. So I just think about what a character might do, and I think of something I'd never thought of before, and it solves a problem. Like here's a flat bit, right? So going for a run, or you could do something else, couldn't you? You could go for a swim, or you could doing something physical. I think makes you think differently, and that's a good way of providing solutions. And then the second thing I do, which is slightly mad, it's a bit unhinged to be honest, and I feel a bit embarrassed sharing it, but I would go for a walk and I would interview myself out loud about my book. Well, welcome to the show, Mr. Mason, and it's good to have you here. Have you traveled far? And I wonder if you might tell us about the book you're writing at the moment. Maybe you could describe it in just a few paragraphs. And I make myself do that. And I find it surprisingly hard. When I've managed it, then I will say to myself, that was very interesting, but so boring and long-winded. I wonder if you could do it again much shorter. So I try and do it shorter. And then I say to myself, yeah, that was still very boring, Simon. Maybe you could describe your novel in a single sentence. And I would do that for different chapters and different sections of the book as well. And I find that if I've got to pretend to describe to someone else what it's about in a succinct way, I manage sometimes to isolate the key point of the chapter or the key point of the scene. And very often it's not what I thought when I was writing. I've been writing wrongly to the wrong point, and I've now flushed out the right point, and I can begin then to develop it in a different, better way.
Some great tips. Thank you very much. And can you tell us, did you always want to be a writer, and how was your path to publication?
I sort of answered the first question a little bit because of the Dylan Thomas thing. So there were two events looking back. That was the second one, and that was me thinking I want to do something with language. I want to write. I thought of it then as a solitary sort of thing. But the first moment came when I was, I don't know, really young, maybe 6 or 7 or something, in the playground. And I've just got a memory of a little group of kids around me, and I'm saying something to them and they're laughing. So I don't think it's anything as grand as telling a story. It's telling a joke or an anecdote, and it's the feeling of having an audience. So I think that was important to me, in thinking I wanted to be a writer. I liked the idea of communicating to an audience. Um, and then the other moment was the Dylan Thomas moment. I liked the idea of working with language. Path to publication, I've been really lucky, I think. Um, After discovering Dylan Thomas, I didn't want to write anything but poetry for about 10 years. And then I started to work for Oxford University Press, and I worked on their poetry list. And I realized that the average sale of a new poetry book was about 6 people. And it would be less if you eliminated the poet's mother and brothers and sisters. And so I thought I'll maybe try and write a novel. And so I did. I'm quite disciplined, and that's an important part of writing. And I managed to write the novel. I sent it off to an agent. The agent said he would like to represent me, and he sent it off to publishers, and a few of them were interested, and we chose one of them, and they published it. It was it was stupidly easy, really, and that's about being lucky. It's about, I was fortunate to get an agent who then I had, he's just retired last year, but he was my agent for 35 years. That's just luck, getting the right person. And then I've had a number of publishers, but they've all been very good to me, I must admit. And I haven't had that sort of scenario where an editor leaves and another editor takes over and there's disruption. And so I've had a very tranquil sort of history of publication myself. I just feel very lucky.
Mm. Yeah, that is unheard of. Everybody that we speak to, they're like, yeah, the publishing world is cutthroat. It's so hard to get published. So it sounds like you've, like you say, been super, super lucky. The stars must have aligned for you there.
Yeah,
Was that your first novel then? The first novel that you wrote got published?
yeah.
Wow,
See, that was lucky as well, wasn't it? I mean, it's ridiculous. And so, as you point out, lots of writers have much more difficulty and have to really dig in, because it's difficult, if you get knocked back, to keep going. Um, I mean, I suppose as an editor, then I've been familiar with seeing that in other authors. And what I say is a bit brutal. I say, to be honest, if you want to be a writer, you have to do it because you want to write, not because you want to be a writer and you want to be published and you want to do all those things, because that's not in your power. Once you've written the book, you can't guarantee it's going to be published or get reviewed or win prizes or sell well. You can't guarantee any of those things. It's out of your hand. You'll be helpless. You might get knocked back. And if you get knocked back, you have to be able to fall back on yourself and say, yeah, but I wrote the book. That's an extraordinary achievement, even if it's not published. It's so hard to write a book. I take my hat off to anyone who completes a book, but that has to be your main motivation. And anything else, you can do what you can, but what you can do is very limited. you have to be the recipient of good circumstances and as I say, luck.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And what does a typical writing day look like for you?
There's never really a typical writing day, right? Today was a typical writing day. It began with a trip to the dentist.
Oh,
Um, yeah, I'm fine, thank you.
how exciting.
The Nashes are back to normal, but yeah, a normal writing day. Okay, what I'd like is I write from 9 till 12, and then I stop and have a 2 hour break. I go for a run, as I said, or something like that, and then I write from 2 till 5. And then I can't pant on any longer than that. I get tired these days, so it tends to be sort of 6 hours. And the first bit of the day in the morning is spent going over what I've already written and rereading it and rethinking it and always making changes. I'm a very slow thinker, so I miss things early on. And then the afternoon is spent more on pushing forward and trying to get, if I'm in the composition phase, trying to get words on the screen, or if I'm in a messy play phase, just carrying on with the messy play that I'm doing. So that's yeah, that's like a typical working day. I do. I mean, I've got this new book coming out, so I'm disrupted at the moment. I've got events and things like that. So and talking to you, I think of myself as quite a shy, introverted person who doesn't say much. But the truth is, you once I get going, you can't shut me up. So I go off and I do all these events, and I'm very happy to do them.
Perfect for a podcast guest.
Would you be able to give our listeners a book recommendation?
Um, oh well, so many, right? That's one of the wonderful things about literature. Okay, I'm going to give you a recommendation of a book I'm reading at the moment that I haven't even finished, because I'm just so struck by it. So I was asked by my publisher to champion a young foreign novelist at the Oxford Literary Festival that's coming up. And I said yes without knowing anything about the author or the book, just hoping that I might like it. Anyway, it's really remarkable. He's a young Swiss novelist. He's only 22 years old, Nelio Biederman, and he's written a novel called Lazar. And it's a family saga of Hungarians in the 20th century, really before, during, and after the breakup of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But it's a family saga, so it's very personal and very intimate. That's just the background of what's happening in that part of the world. Um, it reminds me of Garcia Marquez. It reminds me of sort of classic fiction in a way. It doesn't read like a young person's novel at all. It reads like someone who's been writing for dozens of years and is absolutely at the top of his game. So I'm really struck by it. So there we are, Lazar by Nelio Biederman. It's not quite out yet, I don't think, but it'll be out very soon.
Thank you. Well, I'll look out for that. It sounds great.
Yeah.
Promoting this latest book, but are you working on the next one? Have you got anything in the pipeline that you can tell us about?
Yeah, I'm on the I'm on the treadmill. I'm very late to crime fiction. I wrote literary fiction and then I wrote children's books. And then I wrote a crime novel and I sent it off to the editor who had asked to see it. And he said, "Oh, let's meet." He didn't tell me what he thought of it. And so I met him. And the first thing he said to me, I didn't even know if he'd liked the book. The first thing he said was, "How many can you write a year?" And I hadn't realized, even though I've been in publishing, that if you're in crime fiction, what you're really after is a successful series. And if you're going to publish that, momentum is really important. And I said something like, "Oh, one a year, two a year, four a year. How many do you want, John?" And it, I'd never written a novel in under 4 years before, but he said, "Okay, well, we could probably make do with one a year." So I'm on that treadmill. So I'm writing a new Ryan and Ray story. I've done my messy play, which took 4 months this time. and I've just started the composition phase. And it's the last one started with a riot against asylum seekers. They were called far right riots. They weren't always that, but this one is like a pair. This is what some people might call Antifa riots. So the other way, um, and it begins with in fact, a fire in a garden room in Oxford. Oxford's full of garden rooms. People write in them and work in them and have little workshops and stuff. Anyway, there's a fire, and the men clearing away the debris find among the wreckage a little gift tin of tea, and inside the tin they find a human ear, and that's how it begins.
Oh, wow.
Can't wait for that one. That sounds right up my street. Oh, that's brilliant. And yeah, we're really looking forward to seeing that one coming out. And like we said, we absolutely loved your new novel. So recommend that to anybody who's listening. We would definitely suggest you go and check that out. And Simon, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the Write Club. So thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure being here. Thank you. And you'll be grateful. I'm finally shutting up.
I could sit and listen to you for
Yeah, right.
at
Yeah.
least another hour, maybe.
Yeah, not even my mother would say that.
Full of so much wisdom and tips, so say no.
Yeah, my mother definitely wouldn't say that.
Thank you so much, Simon.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks for tuning into the Write Club. We hope you enjoyed this episode and feel inspired to keep writing. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at Writers Online, your go-to for writing tips, competitions, and exclusive updates. Plus, you'll never miss an episode of the Write Club. Until next time, happy writing.